The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. There was a wedding in Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples were also invited to the wedding. When the wine ran short, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, how does your concern affect me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servers, "Do whatever he tells you." Now there were 6 stone water jars there for Jewish ceremonial washings, each holding 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus told the servers, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then Jesus told them, "Draw some out now and take it to the head waiter." So they took it. And when the head waiter tasted the water that had become wine, without knowing where it came from, although the servers who had drawn the water knew, the head waiter called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves good wine first, and then, when people have drunk freely, an inferior one. But you have kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this as the beginning of his signs in Cana in Galilee, and so revealed his glory, and his disciples began to believe in him. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Ave Maria.
Ave Maria.
Well, if you're a regular participant in the Day with Mary, I'm sure you've heard many sermons on Fatima over the years, and especially in this centenary year. And I know some of you were at Buckfast Abbey last Saturday, where a conference was held, Fatima 100 years later. But as the centenary of the last visit of Our Lady to Fatima has only just passed, just over a week ago, it's important for us to return to this familiar subject today. As you all know, on the 13th of October 1917, the crowds came to Fatima in their tens of thousands, despite the pouring rain and the muddy roads. Several times Our Lady had announced that in October she would perform a miracle so that everyone may believe. And so the pious faithful flocked to Fatima to witness the power of God. They stood alongside many gloating non-believers who came hoping that the church would be ridiculed, that nothing would happen. A devout woman who had taken the 3 children into her home was absolutely overwhelmed by the crowds, and she told them, "If the miracle that you predict does not take place, these people will burn you alive." But the children responded, "We are not afraid because Our Lady does not deceive us." And as we all know, they were not disappointed. Our Lady, the Lady of the Rosary, did come, and at the end of the vision, everyone started pointing to the sun. It was bright without harming the human eye, and it spun round on itself in a mad whirl. It then seemed to loosen itself from the firmament and advanced upon the earth, as if to crush us with its huge, fiery weight. The sensation during these moments, said one eyewitness, was terrible. And then it stopped, and the spectators who had been soaked moments before felt dry. According to one priest, when the people realized that the danger was over, there was an explosion of joy, and everyone joined in thanksgiving and praise to Our Lady. This miracle of the sun has been called one of the greatest manifestations of God's power in the history of the Church. Over 900 miles away in England, no one saw the sun dance in the sky, but it was raining as well, just like today. No one knew what was happening in Fatima, all those miles away. Few people in England would have heard of that tiny village, and there were no reports of the apparitions in any of the newspapers, not even the Catholic ones. People simply got on with their lives, probably complaining about the weather, as we always do, and probably worrying about their sons and sweethearts who were fighting for king and country in the trenches. It was raining also in Belgium, where a great battle was being fought around the city of Ypres, the Third Battle of Ypres, sometimes known as Passchendaele. The soldiers, British, French, and German, all had a common enemy, the mud. One correspondent recorded that the battlefield was drenched again with rain, and the swollen streams in the furrows below Passchendaele overflowed still further through the wilderness of craters and ruined buildings. That day, the 13th of October 1917, over 500 British soldiers lost their lives. The world was at war, and we often forget that Portugal was one of the nations involved in that conflict, and probably some of those who gathered at Fatima must have had relatives or friends fighting in the front line. Only a few days before the first vision at Fatima, on the 13th of May that year, the Pope, Benedict XV, had pleaded for peace. He said, "To Mary then, who is the Mother of Mercy and omnipotent by grace, let loving and devout appeal go up from every corner of the earth, from noble temples and tiniest chapels, from royal palaces and mansions of the rich, as from the poorest hut, from every place wherein a faithful soul finds shelter, from blood-drenched plains and seas. Let it bear to her the anguished cries of mothers and wives, the wailing of innocent little ones, the sighs of every generous heart, that her most tender and benign solicitude may be moved, and the peace we ask for be obtained for our agitated world." Well, it is as if Our Lady had heard the prayers of Pope Benedict. Fatima truly reminds us that Mary cares, that Mary intervenes in our own affairs. She's always been concerned for her children and with the fight against evil. She is, after all, both our mother and the second Eve. And even in the Gospels, she showed her concern for others through her visit to her cousin Elizabeth and, as we've just heard, through her intervention at the wedding feast at Cana. So many shrines around the world have memorials to Mary's help, her guidance, her compassion. These range from decisive battles to individual favors known only to that person. Mary's interventions in history all show a common pattern. She normally visits the humble and the poor, often children, and she has a particular liking for obscure places, little villages no one has heard of, like Lourdes or Fatima or Walsingham. Her messages are all about trust in God, about the conversion of sinners, about praying the rosary, about building a church so that people can be led to her Son. But Fatima, in many ways, is unique in its timeliness and its importance. Our Lady's message is full of hope at a time of war, but it also contained a stern warning. On her last visit to Fatima that October, the Lady of the Rosary asked the children to pray the Rosary every day. She warned that people must amend their lives and ask pardon for their sins. And she said that the war would soon end and soldiers will return to their homes. But despite her words, the world would see the horrors of a Second World War, the spread of communism, and increasing secularism, as we all see in our midst. And 100 years on, we live in a similarly confusing and desperate world, not only in the global perspective, but in our own country and even in the church itself. In this so-called enlightened 21st century, the persecution of Christians has also reached a new peak. But we have the assurance of Our Lady that her Immaculate Heart and that of her Son will triumph. So we must not be afraid. As I speak, I think there might be a bit of a storm brewing outside, wind and rain, rather like that October day in Fatima. What a wonderful image, because if we stay close to Mary here in the church, if we seek refuge with her, if we follow Jesus, then we have nothing to fear. Fatima reminds us to trust in God, to pray very much, and to make sacrifices for sinners. So let us trust in her message and become, as we heard last week, agents of her triumph, even if we don't see this triumph in our own lifetimes. Our Lady of Fatima, pray for us. Ave Maria.